issued an unreserved apology to the child abuse victim, whom she described in a letter to the BBC as an extremely disturbed person. She's told Demetrius Panton that she is sorry for the distress she has caused him and, quote, genuinely sorry for having contributed to your pain and anger. Mr. Panton, who's now working as an advisor to the government's New Deal programme, was abused in a children's home in Islington in North London, where Mrs. Hodge was leader of the council in the 1980s. And this evening, he said that the minister's apology is not enough.
I've experienced quite a lot of sad things in my life, and I know the difference between a genuine apology and an apology which is based as a consequence of legal and political expediency. And I believe that Mrs. Hodge has done the right thing by apologising to me, but I believe she should do the decent thing to the 11 million children out in British society by actually resigning.
Well, Liz Davies was one of the Islington social workers who helped to expose the child abuse scandal while Margaret Hodge was leader of the council. She now lectures in social work at London Metropolitan University. Does she think that Mrs. Hodge should keep her ministerial job?
I always did believe that she was not the right person to be Minister for Children, given her history and that she'd never been accountable for what happened in the Islington child abuse scandal. She subsequently described children in care as disruptive. She's now described Demetrius as extremely disturbed. She's
apologised for that.
She's apologised
for that.
And obviously one accepts any apology, and and I'm willing to accept that she has regrets and all the things she said about how much she's learnt. But she's not the person for that post. I teach police and social workers to interview children. If they described an abused child as extremely disturbed, they would lose their job.
But Mr. Panton is now an adult. Margaret Hodge has apologised. She has recognised that she should not have said what she did say. By all accounts, she is reckoned by the Prime Minister to be a very effective minister, doing a good job. Given what she has said today, could she not continue?
I absolutely think not. What message is she giving to children in this country who are at risk of abuse and who are on the point of disclosing, perhaps, about that abuse, which is extremely difficult for any child to do, any survivor to do, even an adult survivor? The message is, if you do it, you might be called extremely disruptive. And that is a message that should not be going out to the children in the UK. There has to be a statement from Tony Blair to say that this government has not got that attitude towards children and that they are willing to hear if children have allegations of abuse.
Mr. Panton appears now, or his lawyers appear now, to be seeing whether there is some way in which they and Mrs. Hodge's representatives can reach an agreement. If they do, would you then be prepared to say the line is drawn?
No, because it goes way beyond that. This is just an illustration of her attitude towards young people who have suffered abuse. And this has done profound damage to child protection in this country. To talk about children as disturbed who suffered abuse, that is an abuser's agenda. That's the way they describe abused children, putting the blame on the victim.
Do you really believe that what Margaret Hodge said about Mr. Panton could have a direct effect on children who are being abused now and on their preparedness to come forward and say what's happening?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, she's Minister for Children. She should set an example. She should be sending out a clear message to children that this government is willing to listen. There have been scandals all over the country, institutional abuse on a massive scale. Islington was a very big network of abuse, and there are people out there who've still never come forward. And, I can feel their suffering, really, as they've heard the way she's spoken about Demetrius, who is a very, very brave and courageous survivor of the most horrific abuse.
Margaret Hodge has a job to do at the moment. She has been given certain responsibilities. She has now launched various initiatives. She is said to be doing a good job in the post in which she is. Would it not be just as damaging if she were to quit in the middle of all that?
I don't think so. I think the child protection at the moment is at a turning point, and there's some really crucially important issues to discuss, particularly the Green Paper needs to be open to debate, and her in that post clouds the issue.
Former Islington social worker Liz Davies. Well, on the line now is Steve Richards, political commentator for The Independent on Sunday. Steve Richards, do you think Margaret Hodge can survive this?
I think she's in difficulty because when the media gets a story like this and gets a bit of blood, as they've had today, with a sort of apology, it rarely stops with the apology until they've got the victim. But it's been fascinating listening to the programme because it is really an example of where we are, I think, in British politics at the moment. First of all, we hear that Rupert Murdoch will decide the next government, and then, in effect, a ministerial fate is being decided, I suspect, by a combination of the Evening Standard in London, the BBC following up Evening Standard stories, and so on. And I think probably that makes her very vulnerable. Whether it's fair or not is another question, but I think when an issue like this gets to this point, an apology is rarely enough to prevent more problems for the minister involved.
There were questions raised, weren't there, when she was appointed Children's Minister because of the whole Islington saga and the questions that were raised around that. Do you think the Prime Minister's going to be having second thoughts now?
I suspect so, although the whole thing's a bit of a farce, really, on one level, because I think the main role of her job is to coordinate various anti-poverty initiatives across Whitehall aimed at getting families on low incomes with kids on low incomes out of poverty, and I think that's her main role, and it's quite a clever idea, and she's been quite effective so far, as you've suggested in other interviews, at doing that, and yet constantly, for one reason and another, this episode in Islington when she was leader of the council keeps on coming back. Nothing has happened since then, and she was leader of the council at the time and admitted she's learned from it. And I have to say, I think it is unfair, really, that she could well lose the job over this issue, which she has acknowledged she has not done particularly well in the past.
Just a final thought, Steve. I mean, Islington is where the Blairs used to live. They were near neighbours, I think, of Margaret Hodge and her husband before they moved to Downing Street. Are they close?
Yeah, they know each other well and mixed socially when they were in Islington when Labour was in opposition. I can tell you now that won't make the slightest bit of difference when Blair calculates whether or not she can stay. He has been ruthless before with old friends like Harriet Harman, and if he decides, which is quite possible, that the role for all kinds of reasons is unsustainable, he will do one of two things. He will either move her after the Hutton report, when I know he plans quite an extensive reshuffle. It's quite possible he'll move her or sack her before then if it becomes sustainable. Friendship at this level of politics will make no difference at all.
Steve Richards of The Independent on Sunday. Many thanks.